there are lots of things that we can't measure. So sensor technology hasn't really come that far. I mean, we only just now have power meters for running, right? That's a recent thing, isn't it, Will?
Yeah, I mean, it's recent in its accepted popularity, really. Whereas, they have been around for about 5 years, but now it's just coming into where a lot of other companies are picking them up. They're becoming more accessible. The technology, or at least algorithms, are being built into the likes of Polar and Garmin and other kind of watches, and then Stride is gaining its influence in the running world. But yeah, before that, I mean, how long's power been available to cycling? And now it's just entering into the running world.
Yeah, I mean, it's been around for a really long time, but we haven't had access to these sensors. As technology advances, we're going to start to learn more and more about what we're doing, especially in races, and we'll be able to analyze more data because there are still so many things that we can't measure, such as hydration, excitability before an event. So when we're taking into account power output and heart rate, and we're looking at someone's performance in a race, and we don't really know the whole picture, we need to kind of take it with a grain of salt and try and understand some of the other things that might be happening. So my pro tip is around that. I've been known to get a little too crazy with my analyses, but I think eventually there's going to be sensors everywhere, and we're going to be able to analyze everything that we're doing. And then as coaches and scientists, we're going to really have a good understanding of what's happening out there.
Yeah, so being an early adopter on some of this technology as a coach is really going to put you at the forefront of things that are going to become common knowledge, and you want to be ahead of the curve.
Yeah, and these things all take a really long time to learn and understand. I've been using a power meter since I think like 2008, and I'm still learning new things every day. And you've been using the running power meter since it came out. You had the first one.
I did, and not only does like the technology evolve, but the metrics and the algorithms and the data they're pulling out of those devices becomes new and innovative. And so if you are already struggling to grasp the fundamentals because you're a late adopter, it makes it really hard to even keep up with the advances that are going beyond the fundamentals that athletes start to ask about, like ground contact time vertical oscillation in relation to different training modalities, inclines, ground terrain, variability. Like there's so much that deceleration around corners and increasing velocity, it's endless.
So we talk a lot about pacing, and pacing's always been like one of my favorite things to talk about. And this was a real deep dive research study that we did at Massey University, and Will was one of our willing participants for this study, where we went up a hill really hard, at least pretty hard, right? You went up at threshold.
Yeah.
And then you coasted down the hill, or you went as fast as you could down the hill on trails and on the road.
It was super interesting. Like, so what Matt had us do was, right up at threshold for, I can't remember, about 8 minutes or so. And then we took the descent, the super like mountain bike technical descent, and we were allowed to pedal, and then we weren't allowed to pedal. And then we did one just on the road. And I was faster, not pedaling, which was super surprising.
Yeah, and the whole point that we were trying to understand is how do your skills, how is your skill execution as you get tired? Because if you do a hard effort up a hill and then you need to get back down the hill, and you guys do this in running too, where you can get to the top of the hill, and if you sprint up and you're totally wasted at the top and you still have to run back down, how good's your technique going to be down the hill?
Yeah, it can really affect you. Being footing, foot placement, the demands like of descending and technical descending at that, even descending and running at all, it has huge demands in an eccentric loading because we're having our weight alongside gravity at pace. If you over exert yourself on the descent because you're thinking that you're gaining free energy, free speed, it can sometimes be more demanding than what you expect.
Yeah, and then as you go on in a race or in a training session, that's just going to have a carry-on effect and continue to affect you because we didn't just stop when we get to the bottom of that hill, right? We have to keep going.
Yeah, and that's what we can look at that when we look at pace, power, heart rate data from the event.
Exactly. But remember when we talked about there's still some things that we're not seeing that are happening with that. We can see heart rate and we can see power, but there's still other things that are happening that we don't fully understand. So if we can understand what's happening with pacing, power output, heart rate, we're at least getting a better picture, and then we can start to understand these other things and pick them out. So with this, as they coasted down the hill or they pedaled down the hill, their heart rates were lower coasting, and their VO2 was lower when they were coasting, but they weren't any slower. They felt a lot slower, but they weren't any slower, statistically speaking. So this was science. And then there was a lot of things going on, such as vibrations that they had to deal with, and when they coasted, they were better able to recover due to those vibrations.